The hill nobody returned from, until one ranger crawled back alive, January 30th, 1944, 2140 hours. The darkness above Cisterna, Italy, was absolute. Staff Sergeant Thomas Fergan lay face down in a drainage ditch 3 miles behind German lines, listening to the sound of his own breathing. Around him, the bodies of 761 American Rangers lay scattered across fields and ditches and farmhouses. Men who had walked into the most catastrophic ambush in U.S. Army Ranger history. The 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalions had infiltrated enemy positions at 0100 hours that morning. Their mission? Reach Cisterna before dawn, hold the town until Allied forces broke through, cut off the German retreat from Anzio. Simple, direct, impossible. By 0800 hours, the Rangers were surrounded. By 1200 hours, they were out of ammunition. By 1500 hours, they were fighting with bayonets and bare hands against German forces that outnumbered them 10-1. And now, as darkness fell over the frozen Italian countryside, Fergan was the last man still moving. His left leg was shattered below the knee. A machine gun burst that had torn through muscle and bone. His right hand was missing 2 fingers. Blown off when a German grenade detonated 3 feet from his position. Blood soaked his uniform. Frostbite had turned his feet black, and he was crawling through enemy-occupied territory with no weapon, no map, no hope of rescue. Behind him, the Germans were executing wounded Rangers. Fergan could hear the gunshots echoing across the fields. Single shots, methodical, moving closer, the sound of mercy killings, or revenge. Ahead of him, Allied lines were 6 miles away. 6 miles of German patrols, machine gun nests, and artillery positions. 6 miles across frozen farmland, where every shadow could be an enemy soldier. 6 miles that no wounded man could possibly cross. The Anzio beachhead was dying slowly. For 3 weeks, 36,000 American and British soldiers had been trapped on a narrow strip of Italian coastline, 7 miles deep, 15 miles wide, surrounded by German forces that controlled the high ground and every road leading inland. The landing had begun on January 22, 1944, Operation Shingle, a bold amphibious assault designed to outflank German defensive positions south of Rome. The plan was simple: land at Anzio, race inland, cut German supply lines, force a retreat, and open the road to Rome. Instead, the Allies landed and stopped. Major General John Lucas, commanding 6th Corps, refused to advance beyond the beachhead. He feared German counterattacks. He wanted to consolidate, build up supplies, wait for reinforcements, and while he waited, the Germans fortified every hill, every farmhouse, every crossroads between Anzio and Rome. By January 30th, the beachhead had become a killing ground. German artillery controlled the high ground, guns positioned on the Alban Hills that could reach every square yard of Allied positions. Shells fell constantly, day and night. No pattern, no warning, just sudden explosions that turned foxholes into graves and supply depots into infernos. The smell never left: cordite and diesel fuel and bodies that had been buried in shallow graves because the ground was too frozen for proper burials. The cold seeped through every layer of clothing. Men developed trench foot in foxholes filled with icy water. Frostbite turned fingers black, and the constant shelling drove soldiers into a state of numb exhaustion, where sleep became impossible and waking felt like drowning. The world was cracking open, and the Anzio beachhead was the fault line. Winston Churchill had demanded action. The British Prime Minister needed a victory to justify the Italian campaign. A campaign that was bleeding the Allies white for minimal strategic gain. He pressured Allied commanders to break out of the beachhead, to do something, anything, and so the decision was made: send the Rangers to Cisterna. The U.S. Army Rangers were supposed to be elite, volunteers, specially trained for infiltration and assault operations, modeled after British commandos, men who were supposed to operate behind enemy lines, strike hard, and vanish before the enemy could respond. The 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalions had proven themselves in North Africa and Sicily. They'd conducted night raids. They'd climbed cliffs. They'd assaulted fortified positions that conventional infantry couldn't touch. But by January 1944, they were exhausted. The 1st Battalion had been in continuous combat since November 1942, 14 months without rotation, without rest, without replacements for the men they'd lost. The 3rd Battalion was newer but had been thrown into combat at Anzio immediately after landing. Both battalions were under strength. Both were low on experienced NCOs. Both were being asked to do something they'd never trained for: attack a fortified town in daylight and hold it until relieved. That wasn't a Ranger mission. That was a suicide mission dressed up as strategy. The plan came down from 6th Corps headquarters on January 29, 1944. 2 Ranger battalions, approximately 767 men, would infiltrate German lines under cover of darkness. They would move cross-country, avoid roads, bypass enemy positions. At dawn, they would assault Cisterna from the north and seize the town before German forces could react. Once the Rangers held Cisterna, conventional infantry and armor would break through German lines and link up with them. The combined force would then push north toward the Alban Hills and break the stalemate at Anzio. That was the plan. The reality was different. German forces defending Cisterna included elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division, elite troops with armor support dug into positions they'd spent 2 weeks fortifying. Intelligence estimated German strength at 1 reinforced battalion, maybe 500 men. Intelligence was wrong. The actual German strength around Cisterna was closer to 5,000 soldiers, supported by tanks, self-propelled guns, and artillery that could obliterate any attack. But 6th Corps didn't know that, or didn't care, or knew and sent the Rangers anyway, because political pressure demanded action, and Ranger lives were expendable if it meant satisfying Churchill's need for a victory. On the evening of January 29th, Lieutenant Colonel William Orlando Darby, commander of the Ranger Force, assembled his officers in a freezing tent that smelled of wet canvas and desperation. He spread a map across a folding table, showed them Cisterna, showed them the infiltration route, showed them where they would attack at dawn. One captain asked the question everyone was thinking. "What about air support?" Darby shook his head. "Weather's too bad. No air." "Artillery? Limited. We're out of range once we're past the Mussolini Canal." "Armor support? The infiltration went perfectly for the first 3 miles. The Rangers moved through darkness in 2 columns, 1st Battalion on the left, 3rd Battalion on the right. They bypassed German outposts, skirted minefields, crossed the Mussolini Canal on footbridges that engineers had built under cover of darkness. No contact, no gunfire. Just silent movement through enemy territory. Staff Sergeant Thomas Fergan led a squad in 3rd Battalion's Charlie Company. He'd been with the Rangers since North Africa. He knew how infiltrations worked. You moved quietly, you avoided contact, you reached your objective before the enemy knew you were there. But something felt wrong. The German positions were too quiet, too empty, like they'd been abandoned. "Where is everyone?" a private whispered beside Fergan. "Keep moving," Fergan replied. "Don't talk." At over 400 hours, the Rangers reached their assault positions 1 mile north of Cisterna. They went to ground in a network of irrigation ditches that provided concealment from German observation. Dawn was still 2 hours away. The plan called for them to wait until first light, then assault the town in a coordinated attack. 1st Battalion from the west, 3rd Battalion from the north. Fergan settled into a ditch and checked his Thompson submachine gun. Around him, other Rangers did the same. checked weapons, checked ammunition, whispered prayers. The temperature was 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Frost covered the ground. Breath fogged in the air. And then, at 05 hours, the world exploded. German flares shot into the sky, dozens of them turning night into day. Machine guns opened fire from positions the Rangers hadn't known existed. Mortars began landing among the ditches with deadly accuracy. The Germans had been waiting. The ambush was perfect. German forces had allowed the Rangers to infiltrate deep into their defensive network, had watched them move through the darkness, had waited until the Rangers were in the kill zone, surrounded, exposed, with no room to maneuver. Now they were closing the trap. "Contact front," someone screamed. "Contact left! Contact right!" Fergen pressed himself into the ditch as bullets snapped overhead. He could see German infantry advancing. Gray uniforms moving through the pre-dawn darkness, firing from the hip, throwing grenades. "Return fire," Lieutenant Emery shouted. "Suppress those positions." The Rangers opened up with everything they had: Thompsons, M1 Garands, bars. The sound was deafening. Overlapping bursts of gunfire echoing across the frozen fields. But the Germans kept coming. Fergen fired a burst at a group of advancing soldiers. 2 dropped, the others kept moving. He reloaded and fired again. Another soldier fell. "We need to pull back," the private beside him yelled. "Pull back where?" Fergen shouted. "We're surrounded." It was true. German forces were attacking from 3 directions simultaneously. The Rangers were trapped in open ground with limited cover and no way to retreat. Colonel Darby's voice crackled over the radio. "All units, hold your positions. Armor support is on the way." But armor support was 6 miles away, and the Germans were 50 yards out. At 05:20 hours, the first German tank appeared. It was a Panzer IV, rolling through the fields, with its 75mm gun traversing toward the Ranger positions. The tank stopped 200 yards from 3rd Battalion's line and fired. The high-explosive shell detonated in the center of a Ranger squad. 6 men disappeared in the blast. Body parts scattered across the frozen ground. "Where are the bazookas?" Lieutenant Emery screamed. "Lost in the crossing." "Then use grenades. Get close and use grenades." 2 Rangers sprinted toward the tank. German machine gun fire cut them down before they got within throwing range. The tank fired again. Another squad obliterated. The 1st Battalion on the western flank was in worse shape. They'd advanced closer to Cisterna and were now taking fire from German positions inside the town itself. Machine guns in buildings, snipers in windows, mortars registered on every approach. Major Jack Dobson, commanding 1st Battalion, radioed Darby, "We're pinned down. Heavy casualties. Request permission to withdraw." Darby's response was immediate. "Negative. Hold your position. Relief is coming." But relief wasn't coming. The 3rd Infantry Division, the force that was supposed to break through and link up with the Rangers, had been stopped 2 miles south of the Ranger positions. German armor and anti-tank guns had destroyed the lead tanks. The infantry was pinned down by artillery fire. The Rangers were alone. By 0700 hours, both Ranger battalions were encircled. German forces had closed in from all sides, compressing the Rangers into a shrinking perimeter. Ammunition was running low. Casualties were mounting, and the Germans were bringing up more armor. Fergen's squad had been reduced from 12 men to 6. They were sharing ammunition. Taking at 10:30 hours on January 30th, the ammunition ran out. Not low, not rationed, out. Fergen pulled the trigger on his Thompson. Nothing. He dropped the empty magazine. Reached for another. Found none. Around him, other Rangers were doing the same. Checking pockets, checking pouches, finding nothing. "I'm out," someone yelled. "Me too." "Anyone got ammo?" No one answered. The Germans knew. They'd been listening, watching, counting the shots. Now they were forming up for the final assault. 300 soldiers moving through the frozen fields, fixing bayonets, preparing to overrun positions defended by men with no bullets left. Major Dobson's voice came over the radio one last time. "Fix bayonets, prepare for close combat." Fergan pulled his bayonet from its sheath, attached it to his empty rifle, looked at the 5 Rangers still alive in his squad. "When they come," he said quietly, "we make them pay for every foot." The private beside him was 19 years old, from Ohio. He'd joined the Rangers 6 months ago. This was his first combat. "I don't want to die here," the kid whispered. "None of us do." "My mom, don't think about that. Think about the man in front of you. Kill him before he kills you." The kid nodded. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle. The Germans charged at 10:35 hours. 300 men screaming across frozen ground, running, not firing, saving ammunition for point-blank range, just running with bayonets fixed and grenades ready. "Here they come," Fergan shouted. "Hold the line." The Rangers rose from their ditches, 20 men, 30, maybe 40 still able to fight, against 300. The first Germans reached the ditch line at 10:36 hours, hand to hand, bayonets stabbing, rifle butts smashing, knives slashing, men grappling in frozen mud. Fergan bayoneted a German soldier in the chest, pulled the blade free, swung his rifle like a club, and caught another soldier in the face. Bone crunched. The German dropped. A third soldier tackled Fergan. They rolled into the ditch together. The German was on top, hands around Fergan's throat, squeezing. Fergan couldn't breathe, couldn't see. His vision was narrowing. His hand found a rock. He swung it, hit the German's temple, once, twice, 3 times. The German went limp. Fergan shoved the body aside and climbed out of the ditch. Blood in his mouth, blood on his hands, blood everywhere. The kid from Ohio was dead, bayoneted through the stomach. Still holding his empty rifle, Lieutenant Hayes was dead, shot at point-blank range. Corporal Miller was dead, beaten to death with a rifle butt. The Rangers were dying, overwhelmed, outnumbered, out of ammunition and out of time. And still they fought. A Ranger with no weapon picked up a German helmet and used it as a club, beat a soldier unconscious, then another, then collapsed from exhaustion. Another Ranger fought with a trench knife, stabbing, slashing, moving like something feral. He killed 3 Germans before a grenade exploded at his feet and tore him apart. Fergan saw Major Dobson standing on the edge of a ditch, firing a captured German pistol. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3. Each shot dropped a German soldier. Then the pistol clicked empty. Dobson threw it aside, drew his knife, charged into a group of 5 Germans. He killed 2 before they brought him down. At 10:42 hours, German tanks rolled through the Ranger positions, Panzerfuß moving slowly, deliberately, crushing foxholes beneath their tracks, firing machine guns into ditches, turning the battlefield into an abattoir. Rangers tried to fight back with bare hands, tried to climb onto the tanks, tried to pry open hatches. German infantry shot them off, or the tanks crushed them, or they fell beneath the tracks and were ground into the frozen mud. The slaughter lasted 7 minutes. When the tanks stopped, nothing moved. 761 Rangers, dead or dying or too wounded to fight. Fergan lay in a ditch with his leg shattered and 2 fingers blown off. He'd been hit by a machine gun burst from one of the tanks, felt the rounds tear through his leg, felt his hand explode when a grenade detonated beside him. He collapsed and played dead. German soldiers walked through the battlefield, checking bodies, shooting anything that moved. Fergan heard them coming, felt boots kick his leg, held his breath and stayed motionless. A German soldier stood over him, rifle raised, deciding. "Dieser is tot," someone said. "This one is dead." The soldier moved on. Fergan waited, counted to 100, then 200. Opened his eyes. The sun was setting. The battlefield was silent except for the screams of wounded men being executed. German soldiers moving methodically through the ditches. Single shots, methodical. Fergan realized the truth. The Germans weren't taking prisoners. They were finishing the job. He had two choices: lie here and wait to be executed, or crawl. He chose to crawl. At Urs Thomas, Fergan reached American lines at 0340 hours on January 31st, 1944. He'd crawled for 9 hours, 6 miles through enemy territory, past German patrols, past machine gun nests, past artillery positions where crews loaded shells without noticing the broken ranger dragging himself through the darkness 50 yards away. When the American sentry found him, Fergan couldn't speak. His voice was gone. His throat was too dry. He just raised his mangled hand and pointed at the ranger patch on his shoulder. They carried him to an aid station. Doctors worked on him for 4 hours. His left leg required emergency surgery. The shattered bone had to be set, the torn muscle repaired. His right hand was permanently disfigured, 2 fingers gone, the others barely functional. Frostbite had destroyed tissue in both feet. He would walk with a limp for the rest of his life, but he was alive. 5 other Rangers made it back over the next 3 days. Corporal James Altieri, Private First Class Leslie Nielsen, Sergeant Major Robert E. Halt, 2 others whose names were lost in classified reports, 6 survivors. Out of 767 Rangers who had infiltrated toward Cisterna on January 30th. The other 761 were dead or captured. The captured Rangers, 743 men, were marched to prisoner of war camps in northern Italy and Germany. They would spend the next 15 months in captivity. Some died of disease. Some died of malnutrition. Some were killed trying to escape. Those who survived liberation in May 1945 came home weighing 80 pounds, hollow-eyed, silent, carrying memories they would never fully speak about. The dead Rangers, 18 confirmed killed in action, were buried in temporary graves near Cisterna. Their bodies were later moved to the Sicily-Rome American Cemetery in Nettuno, Italy. White crosses in perfect rows, names carved in marble, dates of birth and death that showed how young they'd been. 22 years old, 20, 19. Boys who had volunteered for the hardest missions because someone told them they were special. The U.S. Army classified the Cisterna disaster for 6 months. No official casualty reports, no press releases, no public acknowledgement that 2 Ranger battalions had been destroyed in a single day. The families received telegrams, missing in action, not killed, not captured, just missing. A bureaucratic term that meant the Army didn't want to explain what happened. Some families waited years for answers. Others never got them. Mrs. Dorothy Emery received a telegram on February 15, 1944, 16 days after her husband, Lieutenant Robert Emery, was killed charging a German tank at Cisterna. The telegram said he was missing in action, no details, no explanation. She wrote letters to the War Department, demanded information, received form responses that told her nothing. In June 1944, she received a second telegram, previously reported missing, now reported killed in action. That was all. No explanation of how he died. No mention that he'd destroyed a German tank while wounded. No acknowledgement that he'd saved the lives of the men in his platoon before machine gun fire cut him down. Just killed in action. Mrs. Emery never remarried. She died in 1987, still keeping her husband's letters in a box beside her bed, still waiting for answers about what happened at Cisterna. Thomas Fergan was told not to discuss Cisterna. His after-action report was marked classified. He was transferred to a rear area hospital and told to recover quietly. But Fergan couldn't stay quiet. In March 1944, he wrote a letter to his sister. told her what happened, told her about the ambush, about the men who died, about crawling 6 miles through enemy lines with a shattered leg because someone had sent 767 Rangers into a trap without adequate support. The letter was intercepted by military censors. Fergan was reprimanded. His pay was docked. He was threatened with court-martial if he spoke about Cisterna again. He never spoke about it publicly until 1983, 39 years later. By then, most of the Rangers who'd been at Cisterna were dead. Heart attacks, cancer, suicides. Men who had survived German prison camps but couldn't survive the weight of what they'd experienced. The battle for Anzio continued for 4 more months. Allied forces remained trapped on the beachhead until May 1944, when a major offensive finally broke through German lines. Rome fell on June 4th. 2 days before D-Day diverted attention to Normandy. The Cisterna mission accomplished nothing. The town wasn't captured. German lines weren't broken. The Rangers' sacrifice didn't shorten the war or save other lives. It was just 767 men thrown into a meat grinder because political pressure demanded action, and Ranger lives were considered expendable. Military historians would later call Cisterna one of the worst tactical disasters in U.S. Army Ranger history. Not because the Rangers failed, they fought with extraordinary. The fields outside Cisterna are farmland now. Wheat grows where Rangers died. Irrigation ditches run through ground that was once frozen with blood. Tractors roll across earth that German tanks crushed 80 years ago. No monument marks where the battle happened. No plaque explains that 767 American soldiers walked into an ambush on January 30th, 1944. The Italian government cleared the battlefield decades ago. What remained were helmets, rifles, dog tags, was collected and cataloged and filed away in military archives that no one visits. Local farmers occasionally find remnants. A rusted bayonet turned up by a plow. Shell casings scattered in irrigation ditches. Once, in 1978, a farmer excavating a new drainage system uncovered human remains. An American soldier, identified by dental records as Private First Class Michael Russo, 1st Ranger Battalion, killed in action January 30th, 1944. His family had been told he was missing. For 34 years, they'd believed he might still be alive, might have survived somehow, might come home. The remains were repatriated, buried with full military honors. His sister attended. She was 61 years old. She'd spent most of her life waiting for her brother to come home. At the funeral, she held a letter he'd written from Anzio on January 28th, 2 days before Cisterna. The letter was optimistic. Talked about coming home after the war, talked about opening a restaurant, talked about getting married. The letter ended, "Don't worry about me. The Rangers take care of their own." The battle itself exists only in declassified reports and aging veteran testimonies, dry military language. 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalions conducted infiltration mission to Cisterna. Mission objective, seize, and hold town pending link-up with Allied forces. Result, 18 KIA, 743 captured, 6 returned to friendly lines. 761 casualties, 6 survivors. The mathematics of January 30th reduced to 2 numbers in a document filed in the National Archives that researchers access maybe twice a year. The official Army history of World War II dedicates 3 paragraphs to Cisterna. 3 paragraphs for 767 Rangers. Fewer words than a grocery list. The paragraphs mention the infiltration, mention the ambush, mention the casualties. They do not mention that intelligence estimates were wrong by a factor of 10. Do not mention that relief forces were stopped before the Rangers even reached Cisterna. Do not mention that political pressure from Winston Churchill had demanded action regardless of cost. They certainly do not mention that 767 men were sent on a mission that was doomed from the planning stage, because acknowledging that would mean acknowledging that their deaths were preventable. Preventable losses don't fit military narratives about necessary sacrifice. Thomas Fergan carried Cisterna for 48 years. He walked with a limp. His mangled hand couldn't grip tools properly. Cold weather brought pain that no medication could touch, but the physical wounds were manageable. The psychological wounds never healed. Every January 30th, Fergan would wake at 0100 hours, the exact time the Rangers had begun their infiltration. He would sit in darkness, remembering the frozen fields, the German flares, the sound of men dying, the 9-hour crawl through enemy territory. His wife learned not to schedule anything on January 30th, learned to leave him alone with his memories, learned that some days the past was more real than the present. In 1983, Fergan finally spoke publicly about Cisterna. He was interviewed for a military history documentary. The interviewer asked if he thought the mission had been worth it. Fergan was silent for nearly a minute. Then he said, "Worth what? We didn't take the town. We didn't break German lines. We didn't accomplish anything except getting 761 good men killed or captured. So what was it worth?" The interviewer pressed, "But you survived. You made it back. Doesn't that mean something?" Fergan looked directly at the camera. "I survived because I crawled 6 miles with a broken leg while my friends were being executed. That's not heroism. That's just what happened. The heroes are the ones who didn't make it back." The interview was never broadcast. Too controversial. Too bitter. Not the narrative military documentaries were supposed to tell. The last survivor of Cisterna died in 2004. His name was Robert E. Halt. He was 83 years old. He'd been captured during the battle, spent 15 months in German prison camps, survived liberation, came home weighing 74 pounds. He never spoke about Cisterna publicly, never gave interviews, never attended reunions. He worked as an accountant, raised 3 children, lived quietly in New Jersey until Alzheimer's took him in his final years. Near the end, when the disease had stripped away everything else, he would sometimes speak in his sleep, call out names, warn people about German tanks, scream for someone to fix bayonets. His daughter sat with him during those episodes, held his hand, whispered that he was safe, that the war was over, that he'd made it home. But some part of Robert E. Halt never left Cisterna. Some part of him remained in those frozen fields on January 30th, 1944, watching 767 Rangers walk into an ambush, knowing that survival was just an accident of geography and timing and luck. Today, the town of Cisterna is quiet, population 38,000, known for agriculture and light manufacturing. Tourist guides mention it briefly as a site of heavy fighting during World War II. They do not mention the Rangers specifically. Most residents don't know what happened there 80 years ago. The farmland remembers, though. Every spring when plows turn the soil, fragments rise to the surface. Metal. Bone. Evidence of a battle that official histories reduced to 3 paragraphs and 2 numbers. And somewhere in the National Archives, filed among thousands of after-action reports from World War II, one line remains from Thomas Fergan's debriefing on February 1st, 1944. A single sentence that captured what 767 Rangers learned on January 30th. "We were sent to take a town we couldn't hold, with support that never came, by commanders who needed a victory more than they needed us alive.